Bradley Whitmore went pale. Not just a little flushed pale. Every drop of color drained from his face as if someone had flipped a switch. The legendary Bradley Whitmore, most expensive divorce shark in the state, the man people whispered about like he was a myth, stood there with shaking hands, riffling through papers he clearly hadn't expected to see. Beside him, my husband Vincent watched his own composure disintegrate. That smug little half-smile he always wore slid off his face and left raw panic behind. The man who had ordered me out of his house. The man who had called our daughter repulsive names. The man who thought he was about to strip me of everything. He'd finally realized the truth. He had already lost. But to explain how we reached that courtroom, I have to go back 7 weeks to the day I was sure my life was over. My name is Miranda Lowry. I'm 34. For 10 years I thought I had a solid marriage. Not a fairy tale, but good. Steady. Before I became a mom, I was a forensic accountant. And a damn good one. My job was to find money people tried very hard to hide. I unraveled fraud schemes executives were convinced were airtight. Then our daughter Hazel turned 2 and was diagnosed with a chronic respiratory condition. Vincent convinced me to quit. She needs you, he said. I make enough for both of us, he said. You can go back to work any time, he said. So I left a career I loved to be a full-time mother and cheerleader for his ambitions. Funny how that turned out. That Tuesday night started like every other. I was in the kitchen making dinner. Hazel was doing homework at the table, her little inhaler next to her math book. Vincent came home early. That alone should have warned me. Vincent never came home early. He loosened his tie, sat down across from Hazel, and in the same tone he might use to announce he'd picked up the dry cleaning, told me he'd filed for divorce. Then he kept talking. He wanted everything. The house, both cars, the investments. He'd already hired Bradley Whitmore, and according to him, I should just accept that I was going to lose. Then he looked at Hazel, our 8-year-old baby, who was right there listening, and said the sentence that burned itself into my brain. He said he didn't need me or my stinky, sick daughter. He actually called her that. Stinky. Sick. Like she was spoiled food to toss in the trash. Hazel burst into tears. I pulled her into my arms while my world caved in. Vincent just watched us with thin-lipped irritation, like we were interrupting his schedule. And then the doorbell rang. Because apparently when your life detonates, the universe sends an audience. Vincent's mother, Dolores, let herself in without waiting. She had a key, of course. Dolores has boundary problems the way the ocean has water problems. She swept into my kitchen like she was inspecting a property she just purchased and started measuring the windows. Literally. She pulled a tape measure out of her designer purse and checked the dimensions for new curtains, while my daughter sobbed in my arms. Dolores has never liked me. From the day Vincent introduced us, she made it clear I didn't measure up. I was just middle class. Just a state school graduate. Wrong background, wrong connections, wrong everything. For 10 years she chipped at me, my cooking, my cleaning, my parenting. Now she was glowing with triumph. She hugged Vincent and told him she was proud he'd finally made the right decision. She said she always knew I'd only married him for his money. The irony of that accusation would be hilarious later. That night it just gutted me. Vincent gave me 48 hours to pack and get out of his house. His house. The house I'd lived in for 8 years. The house where I'd carried Hazel upstairs at 2 a.m. when she couldn't breathe. The house where I believed we were building a life. 2 days to erase a decade. I didn't sleep. I sat in Hazel's room watching her chest rise and fall, listening to the faint wheeze that never fully leaves her breathing, and tried to understand how everything had collapsed so completely. All the signs I'd ignored paraded through my head. More and more late nights, business trips that multiplied out of nowhere, the secret little smiles at his phone. I'd been so focused on being a good mother, I hadn't noticed I'd turned into a ghost of a wife. The next morning, while I packed boxes in our bedroom like a guest being hurried out of a hotel, I found it. A single bank statement that had fallen behind Vincent's nightstand. I almost tossed it with the dust bunnies. But habits are habits. A forensic accountant can't see numbers and not look. Something was wrong. The balance was far too low. I knew Vincent's rough income. I knew our expenses. There should have been at least triple that amount in savings. Where had the money gone? I slipped the statement into my purse. I didn't know why. Instinct maybe. Or muscle memory. Or the part of me that refused to let a discrepancy slide. That crumpled page would change everything. Vincent stood by the door as I carried the last boxes to the car. Hazel was already buckled in the back seat, clutching her worn stuffed rabbit, staring at the house with big, confused eyes. He didn't hug her. Didn't even look at her. Just glanced at his watch, annoyed we were making him late, for golf or his girlfriend, though I didn't know about her yet. I pulled away from the house I had paid for, the life I had curated, and the man I'd clearly never really known. Hazel asked when we were coming back home. I didn't have an answer. But I had that bank statement. And 10 years of training my husband had apparently chosen to forget. Before I go on, imagine you're hearing this as a story someone's telling you over coffee. That's how I lived it. One shock at a time with no skip button. Vincent didn't stop at ending our marriage. He wanted to salt the earth. Within days, mutual friends stopped answering my calls. One eventually confessed why. Vincent had been telling everyone I was unstable, that I had substance abuse issues, that I might be an unfit mother. 10 years of being the dependable wife and full-time mom, and suddenly I was the villain in a story he'd been scripting for months. Little comments at dinners, concerned whispers to neighbors. He'd been laying the groundwork for his perfect divorce, long before he served me papers. Honestly, with that imagination, he should have been a novelist instead of a real estate developer. Then came the worst blow, one that predated even his announcement. 3 weeks before he filed, I'd gotten an explanation of benefits from our health insurance. I hadn't understood it at the time. I was too busy trying to calm Hazel's breathing that day. Now I dug it out. Hazel was no longer covered. Vincent had removed her from his policy. Our daughter, who needs daily medication and regular treatments just to breathe, suddenly had no insurance. The first pharmacy bill at our cramped rental made my stomach flip. One refill of a single prescription cost more than an entire month's rent. This wasn't just cruelty. This was a weapon. And he was aiming it straight at Hazel. Something inside me shifted. Fear sharpened into something harder. That week I met a divorce attorney. Nice woman, cluttered office, kind eyes. She asked who Vincent had hired. When I said Bradley Whitmore, her shoulders sagged. She said my best option was probably to accept whatever settlement they offered. Fighting Whitmore was like trying to stop a tsunami with an umbrella. Encouraging. I asked her Whitmore's hourly rate. She told me. I did the math. Breathing the same air as that man probably cost $500. A few days later, I went to Vincent's office to request documents. In a divorce, both parties are entitled to financial records, tax returns, business statements, so on. His secretary, Ruth, helped me gather what I was legally allowed to see. She was quiet, courteous, always glancing nervously over her shoulder. I barely registered it, because through Vincent's half-open door I saw her. Tiffany Vance. 26, glossy blonde highlights, expensive clothes draped across my husband's desk like they owned it. She laughed at something he said and laid her hand on his forearm in that specific way you only touch someone you're sleeping with. When she noticed me, she didn't look embarrassed or apologetic. She smirked, like I was old news and she was the upgraded model. The affair had been going on for 2 years. 2 years of business trips that were nothing of the sort. 2 years of late nights that had nothing to do with spreadsheets. While I was home wrestling nebulizers and insurance forms, he was whining and dining someone who wrote captions about living her best life, with #blessed and #grateful under pictures from Paris and beach vacations he'd always said were too expensive for us. I know, because that night I made the mistake of looking at her Instagram. Every post was another punch. Then Dolores joined the public spectacle. She posted a long, self-righteous announcement online about how relieved she was that her son had finally freed himself from the gold digger who had trapped him. She wrote, publicly, that I couldn't even give her a healthy grandchild. She literally typed defective genes, where anyone could read it. The comments filled with sympathy for poor Vincent in his difficult decade with me. Then the settlement offer arrived. Thick envelope, heavy paper, Bradley Whitmore's letterhead practically screaming money. Vincent would allow me to keep my clothing and my car, which was already in my name. Everything else, the house, all investments, retirement accounts, would be his. I'd receive minimal child support calculated from his reported income. which I already suspected was fiction. I had 30 days to accept, or face his full legal arsenal in court. I sat in that tiny kitchen, listening to Hazel cough in the next room, staring at Whitmore's letter. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something clean and bright. Not fear. Clarity. Vincent remembered the woman who made his dinner and smoothed things over with his mother. He forgot who I'd been before I became his full-time support staff. He forgot I used to dismantle financial lies for a living. I dug the crumpled bank statement out of my purse. The numbers still didn't add up. I decided to find out why. I hadn't done forensic work in 6 years. Turns out those skills don't disappear, they just go dormant waiting to boot back up. Every night after Hazel went to sleep, I spread documents across my kitchen table. Bank statements, tax returns, credit card bills, everything I could request through Discovery. Plus the records I'd kept over the years because accountants hoard paperwork the way dragons hoard gold. My grandmother used to say, "Numbers don't lie." But people use numbers to lie all the time. Finding those lies had been my specialty. Vincent had been lying for a very long time. I called my college roommate, Patricia Holbrook. We'd suffered through forensic accounting exams together, dreaming of nailing corporate criminals. She'd stayed in the game and built a thriving practice. When I explained, she didn't hesitate. She said dissecting my husband's finances sounded like the perfect Friday night and showed up with takeout, wine, and a legal pad. We covered my living room floor in records like a crime scene. Within 2 hours, she was pointing at patterns with that particular gleam in her eye I remembered from college. She said my husband was either numerically illiterate or hiding a lot of money. I said Vincent was excellent with numbers. She smiled. Then we're going to have fun. While we dug, Vincent kept escalating. His lawyer filed for full custody of Hazel. Their argument? I was financially unstable and couldn't care for a child with medical needs. The same man who'd removed his daughter from insurance and called her stinky and sick now presented himself as the only responsible parent. He didn't actually want her. He wanted a weapon. He knew threatening to take Hazel would hurt me more than anything. I stopped feeling afraid. I started feeling dangerous. The first clear findings came after 3 late nights. Hidden investment accounts, opened at a bank we'd never used before, never disclosed on our joint statements. More than $200,000 in them. Money siphoned from his business income and disguised as expenses and taxes. Funds that should have been marital property. Money that could have paid for Hazel's care instead of keeping me awake wondering how to afford refills. Then came the house. The house Vincent loved to call his. I remembered when we bought it. I'd been 7 months pregnant, on bed rest because of complications. Vincent had handled the closing. He'd brought me stacks of papers to sign in bed, and I'd sign them because that's what you do when you trust your husband. My grandmother had died during our first year of marriage and left me $200,000, more money than I had ever seen. I wanted to use it to build something lasting. We put $175,000 down on the house. My inheritance. I had the bank records showing the transfer, the closing statement listing that down payment. But when I finally pulled the deed and read it carefully, my name wasn't on it. Vincent had bought the house with my grandmother's money and titled it solely in his name. I called Patricia at midnight. "Do you have proof?" she asked. "I have the estate records, my bank statements, the wire receipt, and the closing documents," I said. She whistled softly. "He is either insanely arrogant or insanely stupid. Possibly both. We're going to bury him." And we weren't done. We found a shell company registered in Delaware. Offshore accounts in places I had to sound out. A pattern of transfers that looked exactly like textbook embezzlement. Vincent wasn't just hiding money from me. He was hiding it from his partners. He was stealing from everyone. My grandmother had also taught me to keep an emergency stash. A secret account no one else knows about, she'd said. Because life has a nasty sense of humor. I had $8,000 tucked away in an account Vincent never knew existed. Not much but mine. It would bankroll the first phase of my counterattack. And I still held my certifications. I'd kept them current with online courses during nap times and quiet nights, telling myself it was just in case I went back to work. Apparently some part of me had always known I might need an exit strategy. The evidence was piling up. The lines were connecting. Now I needed someone who could weaponize it. I needed a lawyer who didn't flinch at the name Bradley Whitmore. Her name was Camille Ortega. Her office was above a bakery downtown. No marble lobby, no abstract art. Just a battered desk buried in files and a woman with sharp eyes who looked at me like she already knew how this ended. Patricia had found her through professional contacts. Camille had been practicing family law for 22 years and had beaten Whitmore twice. He pretended not to remember her name, which she found deeply amusing. I told her up front I couldn't afford her standard rates. She flipped through the binder Patricia and I had assembled. As she read, her eyebrows climbed steadily. When she finished, she leaned back, smiled, and said she'd take the case on a partial contingency. A small retainer now, a percentage of whatever we recovered later, because, in her words, we are absolutely going to win. Vincent's case, she said, was a house of cards built on quicksand in an earthquake. I liked her instantly. Patricia fronted the retainer. My grandmother's $8,000 covered filing fees and document prep. Even 9 years in the grave, she was still rescuing me. She would have appreciated the symmetry. Camille's first instruction surprised me. Act defeated, she said. Let them get comfortable. Cry at the right moments. Ask confused questions. Make Bradley think you're already beaten. The cockier they feel, the sloppier they get. Sloppiness leaves evidence and openings. So I went back to playing the overwhelmed homemaker who didn't understand legal stuff. When Whitmore's office sent nasty letters, my responses, drafted by Camille, sounded timid and flustered. When Vincent called to gloat, I let my voice wobble. He told me to take the generous offer and save myself public humiliation. I'm thinking about it, I said. He laughed. Smartest thing you've done in years. Meanwhile, I was quietly assembling the file that would destroy his career. Patricia and I worked every night. We documented every hidden account, traced every suspicious transfer, calculated every dollar that should have been marital property, but disappeared into Vincent's secret nest eggs. The total climbed. $200,000, $300,000, $500,000. By the time we were done, he'd hidden over $600,000. From me, from the IRS, from his partners. My husband wasn't just unfaithful. He was a criminal. The trail of Tiffany-related spending was almost darkly comic. Almost. He bought her a luxury car that cost more than Hazel's last 3 years of medical expenses. He'd purchased jewelry, including a $4,000 necklace I vividly remembered on a credit card statement. When I'd asked about it, he'd said it was a client gift. He'd rented her an apartment 15 minutes from our family home, a little love nest he charged to the business. All of it, car, jewelry, rent, he wrote off as business expenses. So he wasn't only cheating on me, he was cheating on the IRS. They typically have limited patience for that. And then Ruth called. Ruth, the quiet secretary with gentle eyes who'd helped me gather documents that day. Her voice on the phone was barely audible. She asked if we could meet somewhere private. We sat in a coffee shop across town, far from Vincent's usual haunts. Hands wrapped around her cup, she told me everything. She'd worked for Vincent for 9 years, almost as long as the company had existed. She'd watched him charm investors, woo clients, and slowly morph into someone she barely recognized. She'd seen the bogus invoices, processed the suspicious wires, filed the Delaware shell paperwork. For years, she told herself it was none of her business. She needed the job. A single woman nearing retirement doesn't throw away steady pay easily. 5 years earlier, though, Ruth's own daughter had gone through a brutal divorce. The son-in-law was wealthy, connected, and ruthless. He took the house. He fought for the kids. He weaponized every legal advantage he had. Ruth had watched her child crumble. So when she saw Vincent file for divorce and heard the way he spoke about me and Hazel, something in her finally snapped or healed. She'd been quietly copying documents for years, just in case, she admitted. Just in case someone someday needed them. She pushed a thick folder across the table. It was at least 3 inches wide. Inside was everything. Records Vincent believed he'd deleted, emails he assumed were gone, a complete, orderly paper trail of his fraud, indexed and cross-referenced by transaction. Ruth had been a secretary for 30 years. Secretaries always know where the bodies are buried, metaphorically, in this case. I asked if she understood what would happen. He'd fire her. Maybe sue her. Her retirement would be complicated. She smiled faintly. She was 62 and tired of helping powerful men hurt good people, she said. Some things mattered more than a pension. Besides, she had already lined up a job at her cousin's accounting firm starting in a couple of months. Camille almost cried when she saw the folder. She called it the most beautiful evidence package she'd ever received. We now had enough to win the divorce 10 times over. And enough to light up federal investigators like a Christmas tree. Tax fraud. Wire fraud. Embezzlement. Perjury. Vincent wasn't just going to lose this divorce. He was going to lose everything he'd stolen. We made 3 full copies of the file. One for the court. One sent anonymously to the IRS because I believe in paying taxes. And one delivered to Vincent's business partners' offices 2 days before our final hearing. They deserved to know exactly who they were in bed with. The hearing was set for 7 weeks after he'd filed, expedited because of the custody issues and Camille's emergency motion about financial fraud in his declarations. Our judge was Elaine Fitzgerald, notorious for having zero tolerance for dishonesty in her courtroom. Everything was in motion. 2 days before the hearing, Vincent called. His voice was relaxed, almost cheerful. He said he was eager to get this behind us. He mentioned that he and Tiffany were planning a celebration trip afterward, to the Malda. Very romantic. Very expensive. He advised me to use the settlement wisely, since it was the last help I'd ever get from him. I appreciate the advice, I said. Then I hung up and laughed until tears came. He had no idea. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined. Wood paneling, humming fluorescent lights, the stale smell of paper and nerves. I'd chosen my clothes carefully. Neat, professional, nothing flashy. Responsible mother, not greedy ex-wife was the look. Camille had coached me. Appearances matter. Vincent walked in with Whitmore like they were arriving at a victory brunch. Perfectly tailored suits. Easy practice smiles. The body language of men who had never truly lost. Whitmore carried a leather briefcase that probably cost more than my rent. Vincent actually winked at me, as if this were all a game. Dolores sat proudly in the front row in an outfit that screamed, "Look at my status." She'd brought a little notebook, presumably to record every detail of my supposed humiliation to share later. Tiffany was there too, a few rows back, staring at her phone, looking faintly bored. I wondered if her suitcase was already half-packed for the Malda. And at the very back sat 3 men I recognized from company events, Vincent's partners. They had received their evidence packages 2 days earlier. They hadn't told Vincent they were coming. Their expressions were blank, which was more unsettling than open fury. If you've stuck with me this far, imagine the air in that room, thick with expectation, smugness, and something like electricity. That's where everything finally snapped into place. The bailiff called the court to order. Judge Fitzgerald entered and everyone rose. She had steel gray hair pulled into a strict bun, reading glasses on the tip of her nose, and the demeanor of a librarian who'd seen every possible form of nonsense and was in no mood for any more. I liked her immediately. Whitmore went first. He painted Vincent as a conscientious, successful businessman trapped for a decade in a marriage to a mentally fragile woman who contributed nothing. He described Vincent's generous settlement offer. He expressed grave concern for poor Hazel, who, he claimed, needed the stability only her father could provide. Words like erratic, irresponsible, and concerning pattern floated through the air. It was polished, persuasive fiction. Then it was Camille's turn. She began gently. Basic questions about our marriage, our home, our finances. Vincent answered smoothly. Yes, the house had been bought during the marriage. Yes, the deed was in his name alone. No, I had not contributed to the down payment. I hadn't been employed at the time. Camille nodded thoughtfully, then produced Exhibit A. A bank record showing a wire transfer of $175,000 from my personal account to the closing company 8 years earlier. The exact date of the purchase. The exact amount of the down payment. Memo line. House down payment in my handwriting. Vincent's smile stuttered. Whitmore leaned in, whispering urgently. Judge Fitzgerald's eyebrows climbed. Exhibit B. My grandmother's estate documents, showing the inheritance I'd received. The path of funds traced cleanly from her accounts to mine to the house purchase. The judge asked Vincent if he could explain why he'd testified I'd made no contribution. He muttered something about joint finances and complicated marital funds. She did not look persuaded. Then Camille rolled out the hidden accounts. Exhibits C through J. Investment portfolios at banks I'd never heard of. Over $600,000 in total. Each one titled only in Vincent's name. Deposits that matched discrepancies in his reported business. Income down to the cent, money never disclosed as marital assets. Money hidden from me. Money hidden from the court. Whitmore's composed mask slipped. Genuine panic flickered underneath. He objected repeatedly. Judge Fitzgerald overruled him each time. Vincent was no longer even pretending to smile. He stared at the documents like he could incinerate them by sheer will. Next came the shell company. The offshore accounts. The web of transactions that spelled fraud in enormous blinking letters. Calmly, Camille explained that copies of these records had also been provided to Mr. Carrington's business partners who were present in court, and that certain federal agencies might find the material compelling. Vincent turned in his seat and saw his partners for the first time. All color left his face. One of them, Gregory, who had always been kind to me at holiday parties, just shook his head slowly. The disappointment in his eyes hit harder than any shouted accusation. Whitmore begged for a recess. His voice shook. The legendary attorney who never lost was visibly unraveling. Judge Fitzgerald denied the request. She wanted this on the record. Then came the affair. Camille presented proof of the car, the apartment, the jewelry, all charged as business expenses, all written off on tax returns. She pointed out that this wasn't only marital fraud. It was likely tax fraud. I glanced back at Tiffany. Her phone was forgotten. Her eyes were fixed on the exit. Survival instincts finally firing. She slipped out of the courtroom a few minutes later. The Malda I suspected were off the itinerary. Dolores sat frozen, mouth slightly open, notebook limp in her lap. This was not the story she'd planned to broadcast. Vincent tried to speak, insisting everything was fabricated, that I'd somehow manufactured an entire fraudulent paper trail. Judge Fitzgerald cut him off. She said she heard lies daily. But the audacity required to commit fraud against a spouse, business partners, and the federal government simultaneously, and then lie about it under oath in her courtroom, was remarkable. Not in a complimentary way. She looked at him as if he were something unpleasant she'd stepped in. Then just briefly she looked at me and I saw respect. Her ruling was everything I'd let myself hope for and more. Full legal and physical custody of Hazel to me. The house, purchased with my inheritance, transferred entirely into my name. 70% of all marital assets awarded to me as compensation for his fraud and perjury. Child support calculated from his actual income, not the doctored numbers he'd reported. All of Hazel's medical expenses covered. Her health insurance reinstated retroactively to the day he'd removed her. The man who had wanted everything walked out with almost nothing. The man who'd ordered me out of his house was now legally obligated to vacate my house. The man who'd sneered at his stinky sick daughter would spend the next decade financing her care, whether he liked it or not. And that, unbelievably, was just the beginning. Within 3 weeks, the federal investigation opened. The IRS does not shrug off meticulously documented tax fraud. His assets were frozen pending the outcome. His passport flagged. The Malda would have to wait. Possibly forever. His business partners filed their own lawsuit. Embezzlement from a partnership is not the sort of thing people forgive. They wanted their money back with interest. And damages. Vincent now had multiple lawyers. Whitmore, however, suddenly had scheduling conflicts, and quietly withdrew. Dolores vanished from social media. Court documents are public record. The gold digger narrative didn't survive contact with reality, particularly not when reality featured $600,000 in hidden accounts and a federal probe. I heard through acquaintances that she'd erased her old posts and was telling people she'd always had concerns about Vincent's character. Some patterns never change. Tiffany vacated Vincent's life approximately 45 minutes after the ruling. The apartment lease was in his name. With his assets frozen, the rent stopped. The The car was repossessed 2 weeks later. I have no idea where she went next. I don't care. She was a symptom, not the disease. Ruth retired on schedule. She mailed me a card with a pressed flower inside, congratulating me. She wrote that her daughter had cried happy tears when she read about the case, and that sometimes justice does in fact prevail. I framed that card. It sits on my desk at my new job. Yes, I went back to work. It turns out forensic accountants who can unpack a massive fraud ring are in demand. Patricia recommended me to several firms. I had 3 offers in a month. I chose the one with the best health insurance and the most flexibility for a single mom. My skills had been sleeping for 6 years. They woke up hungry. Hazel and I moved back into our house. Our house. I let her choose new colors for her room. She picked purple with silver stars. We adopted a shelter cat because she'd always wanted one and Vincent had always said no. She named him Biscuit. He sleeps at the foot of her bed every night. Hazel's breathing is better now. Regular treatment, consistent medication, a home where she feels secure. It all shows. She still asks about her father sometimes. I tell her the truth in pieces she can handle. He made bad choices. He has to live with the consequences. We will be okay. Last month I ran into him at the grocery store. He looked smaller. Not just thinner. Diminished. The expensive armor, tailored suits, polished shoes was gone, replaced by wrinkled khakis and a rumpled shirt. He opened his mouth like he wanted to speak. I walked past him,